And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this session, which marks the pre-launch of our study on bias against women and girls in large language models. This topic is obviously at the very intersection of technology and gender equality. And I remind you, or I inform you, that gender equality is one of the top 2 priorities of UNESCO. It has been and it remains a top priority of the House. This event represents a special occasion, especially that we are only a couple of days away from the International Women's Day that will be globally celebrated this coming Friday, March 8th. And it's obviously very much fitting that we celebrate together the pre-launch of the study. I can show you the cover page of the study, but of course it will become publicly available this Friday on International Women's Day in paper form, but also digitally. So please make sure that you grab your copy or that you download the study from the UNESCO website. So this is a persistent challenge. The role and the contribution of girls and women to today's digital landscape. And the statistics are not good. Let me share 3 of them with you. First statistic, women and girls are less likely than men to have digital and AI skills, and their representation in AI and the tech industry remains significantly low today. A study made by UNESCO in 2019 revealed that women and girls represent globally only 29% of science R&D positions. That is science research and development positions. Only 29% of these posts are occupied by women. Second statistic, 25% women and girls are 25% less likely than men to know how to leverage digital technologies for basic usage. Let me take another statistic from the UNDP, from the UN Development Programme, and the latest UNDP Gender Social Norms Index report. It reveals that nearly 9 out of 10 individuals worldwide hold discrimination against women. 9 out of 10 individuals worldwide hold discrimination against women. This is shocking, this is alarming. Obviously, we need to do something about this matter, and this is again why we have a gender division at UNESCO, and in a minute, the moderator of the panel is my colleague, the director of the UNESCO Gender Division. We cannot afford a continuation of these inequalities while we know that women and girls make up half of the population of almost every country in the world. How can we advance when half the population is left behind in the digital sphere? A final statistic, 1/4 of the global population justifies domestic violence. This is a clear indication of deeply entrenched gender chauvinism within our own communities. The implications of biases, and I'm back to AI and large learning models, the implications of biases there obviously is a continuation of the biases that we have been seeing in the physical world. So what started maybe in the physical world has now passed on to the physical and the digital sphere. And this is, again, a new dimension which is very alarming. Large language models, which constitute the foundational framework of artificial intelligence, these large language models are inherently shaped by the data they are trained on, data woven with the prejudices of our societies. This is a troubling trend where gender discrimination in the real world, as I said, is not only mirrored but also magnified within the digital sphere. Let me give you a specific example. If most examples about leadership in the trained data, therefore in the AI-based systems and applications, if most examples about leadership predominantly feature men, then AI systems may learn to associate leadership with masculinity, reinforcing the societal perception of gendered role. As we delve into the findings of the UNESCO study on bias against women and girls in large language models, we are reminded of the critical role and the critical need to address these issues at their very core. This obviously requires a unified effort involving all stakeholders, not only the technologists, but obviously policymakers and society at large, to ensure that our progress towards our journey towards digital and progress is not hindered or does not include societal unfairness. We would like this session to serve as a call for action. We must implement bold and comprehensive policies that not only promote gender equality in AI and digital technologies, but we would like also to mandate the cultivation of AI technologies free from gender biases. Only then we can pave the way for a digital future that is truly inclusive and that embodies the best of humanity and that is free from prejudices. In closing, let's pledge ourselves to this essential task, inspired by the profound understanding of the need to empower women and girls and all individuals in the digital world. It's only by doing that we can elevate the entirety of humanity. Let me stop here and give the floor to my colleague, Begonia Lazabargarska, who is the director of our Gender Equality Division at UNESCO. She will moderate the next panel. So, Cedric, I'll let you do the official introduction. Let me hold one last time the cover page of the fresh from the print UNESCO study.
Thank you so much, and we are happy to have our Gender Division Director, Begonia Lasagabasta, with us, but also, of course, the co-authors. So a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for this research and for sharing it now, and the floor is yours. We will try to stick to 1 o'clock, 1:05, in terms of time. But thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Cedric, and thank you and big thanks to our dear Tawfik, our ADG of Communication and Information sector, of course, all the colleagues in the team that have in the sector and in the division of gender equality that we are working extremely close together. Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, and welcome, especially all of you and the authors. And I'm delighted to moderate this panel for this study. Really interesting findings and recommendations, and the study is called Bias Against Women and Girls in Large Language Models. And as Tawfik mentioned, it will be launched on Friday, International Women's Day. This study is yet another milestone in UNESCO's long-term work to put ethics and human rights at the heart of the development and deployment of new technologies and to bridge the gender-digital divide. UNESCO intervenes in two levels. The normative level, just a reminder of the recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence, and the most recent guidelines for the governance of digital platforms. Both instruments have a very important component of a gender dimension to empower women in and through development, deployment, and use of digital technologies and propose actionable measures to this end. We also work at programmatic level between the relationship on AI and gender equality in education and lifelong learning, supporting women and girls in STEM fields and empowering them with digital, media, and information literacy skills and competencies, as well as ensuring equal access to information. All these initiatives are centered around a critical issue: combating biases and challenges that obstruct the full participation and leadership of women and girls in the digital space, but also to make sure that women and girls are actors of change to increase the economy, the productivity, anyway, the well-being of our societies. We will be discussing today with these amazing two authors, professors, Dr. Ivana Drobnjak, I don't know if I have damaged too much your last name, is a professor of computational healthcare and director of the undergraduate program at the Department of Computer Science at the University College in London. Her scientific focus is on developing mathematical, computational, and artificial intelligence methods with applications in healthcare. Professor Drobnjak has also been working on gender equality through her career, and this is very important, playing a key role in advancing careers of young women researchers. Professor Daniel Van Niekerk is a computer and machine learning engineering and research fellow at the University College in London. He has been notably involved in developing low resources language technology, including speech synthesis for African tone languages. His work is intended to ensure that smaller sociocultural groups and languages are served and represented by artificial intelligence. Welcome and thank you for being here. They are going to give us a presentation around 15 minutes. Sorry, they have told me to be gatekeeper. I'll try my best. And later on, we will have some questions from the audience, but also online. So over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Begonia. I'll just test the slides first. Is that... Oops. So hi, everybody. So this report was authored by 30 people across a range of different universities and across a range of different fields. Some of it AI scientists, some of them are social sciences, some policymakers. So me and Daniel are presenting a preview of the results of the work that we have done. So as we have heard in the previous discussion, AI offers these extraordinary benefits to do good. However, it does pose high risk, and we need to be able to understand these risks and be able to eliminate them in order to use AI responsibly. So one of these risks is bias. So bias already exists amongst us humans. It is a systematic prejudice that we can hold against a person or a group, and it is based on personal perception and not on objective facts. So, for example, Just because women were not as involved in science historically does not mean that women are less good in science or shouldn't be involved in science. Similarly, algorithmic bias operates in the same way, where there is an error in the processing based on these kind of observation and previous facts. So why is it important to solve this bias? So if unchecked, the biased AI can cause great harm to the society. It can cause discrimination, unfairness, amplification of existing social bias, and it can cause harm on the individual, collective, and societal level. So it is really important to first understand whether there is indeed bias in AI, which is what we have done in our report, then to try to understand where is the bias coming from, and then to provide some recommendation and see what we can do about it. So in our report, we have particularly focused on one very advanced area of AI, large language models, which we will call LLMs, because these have the highest potential to be used in human life and in human decision making. And now I will invite Daniel, who will talk a little bit about the results that we got in the study.
Thank you, Ivana. So most of us have probably been introduced to chatbots like ChatGPT, but for the purpose of this study, I'd like to just describe large language models, or LLMs, from a certain perspective that's useful to this topic. So let's first imagine just a general system that has absorbed a whole vocabulary contained in a dictionary, but not only the technical definitions, also able to use this vocabulary similarly to how people do. This model learns, or does this, by learning from large data sets, including books, news articles, or the internet at large, right? So one thing that's important to note about these models is that they are very or extremely flexible and can either be used by people individually through instructions like write, summarize, describe, to perform things like a digital assistant, or by other AI systems to process language data at scale. For example, to sift through large amounts of job applications during recruitment. So it's very important for these kinds of applications, both for individuals and when you're doing large processing, to be aware of social biases. So I'll give you a preview of some of the studies that we've done here. So as with people, LLMs have internal mental pictures or representations of each word, and crucially also how they are used in conversational context. To investigate these representations in people, psychologists use groups of words that describe aspects of the world. For example, one of the sets of materials is shown here of 8 male and female names, and then words that belong to concepts such as family, including home or parents, or career, such as executive or management. So using these groups of words, stereotypical associations between these concepts were found in people, linking specifically women to concepts like family and the arts, and men to career and scientific subjects. So this is an established fact. And these biases and links are equally strongly found in earlier large language models. In this study, in our own experiments, we reproduce some of this and look at more recent models such as those by OpenAI, and we actually found that in some of those cases, models are actually a little bit more balanced. However, there are still strong biases in some of these cases. So especially in the case that we investigated, associations between names and things like career and family still exist. So a key takeaway from this is that, as with people, it's possible to reduce the inclusion of this kind of bias, but it's actually very difficult to completely eradicate this. And this is because LLMs learn from large amounts of real-world data. Okay. Because LLMs often learn from the internet directly, and that also includes social media, one big problem is the creation of harmful content. So, for example, overtly offensive, threatening, or explicit language usage. This has actually been addressed in later models that through the use of additional human feedback training, similar to how a parent or teacher would correct for inappropriate behavior. In this study, we actually compared proportions of negative content shown in red in these plots, generated by 2 earlier models, to a model that mitigates this on the right. The mitigated model does lead to more positive content, shown in green. However, this is the way that it's done, the mitigation here, acts as a kind of filter, which doesn't necessarily correct for internal biases that we've described earlier. So an important takeaway from this study is that it's possible to address targeted issues once they've been identified and the application context is known. Okay, and then just trying to get the slide to go through. Oh, there we go. Let's just go on back. There we go. Another problem when an LLM learns from sources lacking in diversity is to form oversimplified or stereotypical concepts, again, similar to what could be expected with people. So in this case, we started with prompts such as the man or the woman worked as a, and then we recorded a list of occupations generated by various models for those prompts. Some observations here is, firstly, we can see that man is associated with a large number of different occupations, and women with fewer such unique occupations. And secondly, for humans, for women, the results are actually more repetitive. So you'll see the top 2 or 3 occupations accounted for most of the sentence in women. And then another important aspect here is that when you combine things like gender, culture, and language, and others, these sentences can become even more repetitive. So this intersectionality can actually worsen the situation. For example, in this case here, we show if the subject is Zulu woman, then actually the number of unique occupations actually reduces even more. So basically what we've tried to show here is that these large language models do contain biases reflected in the world against women and girls. And I've already alluded to some of their causes, but Ivana will actually give us a full picture. Thank you.
So to understand the sources of this bias, we really need to be looking at the whole journey of an AI algorithm. So AI algorithms are not humans, but we can apply a similar analogy in the way they are being developed and applied. So the AI algorithm is, in a way, born by a development team. So it's just like a baby AI network, an architecture that is being chosen by the team. And then this architecture is then trained, educated, and validated in the world. Hence, these two, the development team and the world, are the 2 key components of what impacts the way the algorithm will be. And that's where the problem arises. Like said earlier by Mr. Gelassi, right now development teams are extremely biased. In AI, there is only 22% team members which are female across the globe. This is also the case across computer science in general, and also in the education sector. For example, in the UK universities, there are approximately 22% women students. This goes even lower as we go up in the leadership, and the percent can go as low then as 10% or less for the permanent academic positions. So, because this architecture is designed, again, in the environment as it is, then the unbalanced environment will create an unbalanced architecture itself. Now, the second environment is the world. So the world and the status of women and girls in the LLMs are interconnected. Because the LLMs are trained in the world and get all their education material from the world, and actually, it's not even the full world. It is just a narrow window of the world that is available on the internet. And as we know, as it was mentioned before, this window of the world itself, are extremely biased. And hence, this bias will affect the LLMs. It is also the same in the other direction. So once the biased LLMs are created, and then they are used in the world itself will become even more biased. I don't know how many of you are aware, there was an example a few years ago where Amazon has introduced a virtual AI-led recruiter, and then basically selectively eliminated most female applicants, just because the virtual recruiter has found any connotation with a woman in application as negative. So this then further leads to this oversimplification and classification in the world and can amplify the bias. And we have this vicious loop, this amplifying feedback loop from one to another. And that loop is both complex and also it can progress rapidly if we don't address the bias. What is really important is that we can't just fix it by adding an extra layer where, like a teacher, as Daniel said, the model is just kind of instructed not to use negative words, negative connotations, because that's extremely artificial. The core bias in the architecture itself, in the embeddings, will remain, and that needs to be addressed. And like John said earlier, this is why we need to work with the AI developers, and this is also why it's important that we all understand how bias can be corrected. So when we do talk to AI developers, we are not going to be, say, happy when they say, okay, we are working on it this way. We can advise and say, well, let me see your core architecture. Let's see whether the bias is there as well. That's very important. So we did come up with a set of recommendations. And actually, the one I just mentioned is a very important one, which is this collaboration between different key stakeholders. I agree with John. I don't think there's anyone to blame. I think it's important just to work together so we can all bring our own perspectives on the matter and help each other in this. So what we in the report recommend to the AI developers is to mitigate bias at source, to diversify the teams that are working in development, to diversify the training data set that is used for training of the algorithm, to do thorough validation of the algorithms before they are released into the world, to follow guidelines based on ethics, based on safety, to collaborate with organizations such as UNESCO and such as the United Nations to provide these guidelines, and then to use these guidelines to also educate the algorithm themselves. To do continuous improvement and look at the user feedback, and when the users are feeding back that they discover the bias, to act on it. And finally, to provide quality standards, like it is in industry. Safe AI, safe cars, safe planes. So there are lots of examples already in our society, in industry, where quality standards are used that are really good. And I think that should be brought to AI as well. The second set of recommendations is for the policymakers. And here we recommend that those guidelines should be proactively created. The policymakers shouldn't wait for the AI developers to do it themselves, but they should be thinking, work with social scientists, looking at human rights-based and ethics-based AI frameworks that they should be developing so that these AI makers can be following. Because not all AI makers will have the size of organization and the money that it takes, for example, to develop these themselves. A lot of them will be smaller agents, and they will really, both large and small AI makers will benefit from this. We really encourage, as I said, to foster research, to foster collaboration, and also for policymakers to really look after the public and help educate the public on these matters. Finally, we do recommend existence of some regulatory bodies and existence of some form of regulation that should be looking and overseeing the AI. Finally, the recommendations are to the users, and here I will repeat actually what the users before me, for the Professor Amal and John mentioned earlier. Education is key. It is really important for us to know how these algorithms operate before we can use them. It's also important to be aware that they are most likely to have bias, to be looking for that, and then depending on the application, know when to use which model. And then when we find a bias, it is really important to let the AI makers know. To summarize, so there is a definite bias in LLMs that we have found towards women and girls, and we believe this extends to many other populations towards which the bias already exists in human nature. This bias can be improved, and LLMs can have a positive contribution to the society as long as bias is dealt with. And then the LLMs can then be used responsibly. And finally, we need to work together to do that. AI makers, policy makers, and the public. Because it takes a village to raise a responsible AI. This is just a final slide of thanks. I wish to thank all our 30 authors, in particularly Davor Orlic, who brought the team together, Maria for lots of the conceptualization of the work, Professor John Shaw Taylor, who was for the leadership. Also would like to thank IRCAI, which is the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Slovenia, and our UNESCO AI chair at University College London, the Naxos Network, and finally, I would really like to say thank you to UNESCO, not only for commissioning this report, but also really for the invaluable guidance and discussions that we have had, and from which we learned a lot. For me, definitely, as an academic, this was an amazing experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivana and Daniel. It has been a pleasure, this process, to have exchange and to see from different angles. And I really recommend you on Friday to read it, because you are going to be amazed about so many things beyond this presentation. I think one of the role of the functions that we have to do, all of us, is pedagogy. Because many times, as Director of Gender Equality, people ask me, why is it so different to men and to women, or different expressions of gender and sexual characteristics? Because of course there is a problem there. And of course there is a problem also for different cultures, races, name it. Why? And we have to explain it, and people do not believe it in a way. So I think we need to explain to them what is happening offline is translated in the online, and there we don't have much of maneuver, in a way. So I think that this is very important, and let's go to your questions, comments, suggestions. We will take one from the audience here and another one from our colleagues online following us, and after we'll go to you. We will have around 10 minutes, so if my Leona allows me to, 10 minutes, okay? Got it. So anybody who wants to, here we have a lady there. Could you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. Yes, Veronica Millauzuco from the Peruvian Permanent Delegation. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the important research you have done, and for this study presented today. Thanks also to UNESCO for the work you've been doing to raise awareness about gender issues. I would like to hear your thoughts, if possible, about the systemic barriers and biases that exist in developing countries compared to developed countries. So I don't know if you have any findings about the different situation of women that are raised in, let's say, the global south compared to the north, the global north. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Leona, from our colleagues online.
Yes, Begonia, a question on actually with the tests that were done. They were done in English. So if the authors can comment as well as, on lower resource languages, especially coming from the global south, right? How bias might be manifested in these large language models. Thank you.
Thank you, Leona. I had that question in my questions, but I think it's better came from other people. Over to you.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. So we are aware that there is a difference between, for example, in percentages of girls that are in education in STEM subjects. I don't know the data for all the different areas or countries in the world. I just know that when we were doing that for UK, because I was involved in doing that for the UK education, so I know very well that area, and also Europe. But we've noticed that some areas, for example, in India, the percentage of women in STEM and computer science is actually much higher. It goes even in 40%, while in some areas in Global South, it is much lower. So it is very heterogeneous around the world, and it somehow really depends on many different factors that are not just to do to kind of development of the country itself in terms of economic growth, but also somehow to do with the culture, perception of the topic, and things like that. So I think that is kind of what I'm aware of at the moment.
If I, sorry, this is an advertisement, but following that question, the UNESCO is now, working with other partners, and we are doing a study in many countries in the north, in the south, east, west, on precisely access, surveys on access of women and girls and students to STEM. Also, what happens when they are already studying and when they are working also. So we will have by November this study that we will present in the G20. We will have at least the G20 countries. In addition, we may have more countries. So yes, indeed, but this is part of our work also on that, because we know that it's different in different. And the findings are a little bit more tricky than what we think, huh? Because that's something we need to really analyze.
And actually, sorry, that's really important, because when the reason why I know it's so heterogeneous is because in the UK we were trying to find what are the good examples around the world and how we can go up from our 22%. So this is why we were actually looking at other countries and just trying to see, but it would be really useful for us as well if there was somehow a way of collecting this data, because it was for us impossible. I mean, even just getting the data for the UK universities for our team was quite hard. So I imagine the challenge on the global level is much harder.
The different languages.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we just did this in English. What do we expect for other languages? So if I can take study 3 that I presented as an example, we can see that these models kind of typically learn from different contexts, and when the contexts become very specific, there are fewer contexts in the data. So the amount of training data necessary to build quality contexts, understandings of each word by these models is problematic, especially in languages where there are fewer data resources. But I do think that there is, this is also to some extent perhaps solvable if the technology itself matures, if transfer learning between languages can be improved and technology, things like that. So currently we have a situation where just the amount of data is problematic, but if we improve these methods, then we can actually make a dent in that.
We may have one more question from the audience or two. Leona, I'm looking to you. One or two, one audience, one online, to be fair, also talking about fairness. Audience, I see somebody there. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm a journalist from AFP. I had some question about the methodology. So I saw in your presentation that you work on GPT-2 and ChatGPT. So since the beginning of the launch of these models, there's been a criticism about bias. So have you seen a lot of improvement since then? Have you noticed that the companies have already started to take some input because the new models are trained on more data and more, more things? So is it already beginning to be addressed?
Thank you. Online, quickly. No online. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so in the first study I showed, we compared older models to newer models with regards to those word associations. It does seem that at least the newer models have been trained on more balanced data sets there. So as you said, some of the biases in some contexts fell away in the newer models there, but some still exist. So clearly, it's still trained on real world data, so some of that will still exist. So I think there is at least some evidence of that. But then I think, as we also explained in the report, I think these mitigations come from two angles. Firstly, mitigating against inclusion of bias, and so that would be, looking at making sure that training data is sufficient and balanced. But on the other side, mitigating against actual harm. So when you have an application, you can do that. So for instance, with ChatGPT, you can tackle particularly negative content creation because you know what the application is. And in the report, we actually speak about mitigations from both of those angles.
I think that I just wanted to make one point, kind of closing remarks. Something that I've noticed in the panel before and some of the discussions, something that Ms. Isabel and Professor Amal were saying, and John, and which resonates with actually one of the messages I wanted to mention today. So in my opinion, of all the recommendations that we said, the one is really the most important one for me, and that is diversity. And that diversity in leadership teams. Diversity in leadership teams across institutions and across different stakeholders. And when I mean diversity, I mean both diversity of people that can truly represent the population, because oranges can't design for lemons. You can't explain the taste of a lemon. You have to experience it. So we need people at the table that we are designing for all. And the second one is diversity of values. Right now, into the leadership teams, it is the people that, the leadership teams, we get there with this kind of narrow definition of success. However, there are these values such as sustainability, harmony, quality, kindness, peace. We can't quantify these values. Hence, these values just don't get into the leading decision-making, because nobody can compete in kindness. So I think that this resonates back to that we really need to include these values. For example, there are lots of people around us who opt out from pursuing successful careers and becoming leaders because they prioritize the quality of their own family and the quality of life of their communities. They may be looking after their parents or the elderly or involved in childcare. We need to create and environment and leadership, that these people can come and be part of the decision-making table without having to sacrifice the quality of their life or the life of the people around them. People that right now maybe work part-time or flexible or full-time. And I believe if we create leadership teams who are like that, they will then themselves be able to solve all of these problems because they'll be looking at them from all of these different angles. Thank you.
I think merits an applause.